You mentioned your new facilities in the intermodal area. One of the things that, as I began to get into this challenge that we have in our country, that I recognized was that our infrastructure is crumbling. We're $5 trillion in arrears. The American Civil Engineer Society grades our infrastructure as a D. How important is infrastructure to your business? Particularly because you say you ship half of what you make overseas. And then the other thing that we stopped doing, these are all things, by the way, that we stopped doing over the last 30 years. We were doing them during the Cold War, in particular, investing in infrastructure. We were also spending almost 2% of gross domestic product on science and technology research. So basic science research, Silicon Valley, a lot of Boston, a lot of these tech hubs became tech hubs because people like you happen to be around this. Steve Jobs talks about all of this stuff that I think he swiped from Xerox PARC in Silicon Valley to help Apple become what it was. All of these things are challenges that unfortunately you don't have. It all went away before you started your business. We talked about before this interview tariffs, the reintroduction of tariffs, because one of the things that enabled China to do what it did was the removal of the most favored nation trading status requirement for them, the entrance of them to the World Trade Organization, and basically the getting rid of permanent tariffs. China doesn't believe in free trade. They subsidize their manufacturing before jobs. So in between infrastructure, science and technology investment, and the lack of tariffs, because you mentioned one of the major costs, the only cost, or the only benefit is cost in China. Can you go through each of these: infrastructure, the lack of science and technology investment, and the reimposition of tariffs? How you think about each of those in terms of your business?
So infrastructure is relevant to us. We do import components, and we do export finished goods. They come into ports. They need to get to us on our roads. It's all pretty much done. The trucking companies are private, but they're using public roads. I unfortunately like infrastructure in terms of other people's businesses around our area, and having good consistent power and everything else is not something that really matters to me, because I'm doing most of the things I need to do either in here or with vendors primarily from overseas, for the components that we bring in and then turn into finished goods. And but relating to your question about investment in science and technology, I mean, that's where my company came from free money through grants from either privately funded organizations or state-run organizations. I don't believe we ever were able to take advantage of any kind of federal money, but my business partner Pat would definitely know the answer to that one. I mean, one of the big advantages we've always had over China was our innovation and our science and technology. I mean, we still have a more innovative culture, but they're investing a lot of money into improving that over there as well. They're spending their money to make their economy more competitive, both domestically within China and abroad over here. And it just seems like we're not spending money to do anything. And so the tariffs are what the tariffs are. They now exist. I've always thought that it sure would be nice if that tariff money was actually going somewhere specific that the country could get behind. There was never any comment about what is being done with this tariff money. In fact, it was sold to people that don't know any better as they're the ones paying for it. They're not paying for it. I'm paying for it as a business owner importing components from China. I'm not importing finished goods. So if you're importing finished goods at a higher price, you're paying even more for it.
So this, I think this is an important point. We talked about this before. So your competitor that makes saltwater aquariums, if they make the whole aquarium with all the components and they import it into the United States, they're not charged a tariff.
So it varies on a case by case. So we don't currently manufacture glass aquariums. So this is the topic right here. We don't currently manufacture glass aquariums. So we'll just put that one aside. But we do make pumps, lighting, and peripherals, automation and control equipment, and peripherals that are used to keep the inhabitants of the aquarium alive and thriving. In some cases, the components that we are tariffed on are tariffed the same for the individual raw components going into them as the finished good would become. So for example, if I take a motor and a housing and I assemble that here into a pump, the total cost of that may be less, same, or more. Well, let's hold off on more. It may be less or same as someone else importing a pump. But there are some cases, and this is what really gets us, there are some cases where someone can bring in a completely finished, with no American hands touching it, in box, full color print, ready to sell box, good from China to the US that it has no tariff on it. Whereas I'm paying tariff on all the, just the components that I'm bringing in that I can't buy from anywhere else in the world because they're literally only made in China, like the LEDs and the SMT components. And we're always trying to find non-Chinese suppliers for these things. And when I put that product together, I'm actually paying more tariffs to employ all my employees than that other company is running in the garage of someone's house.
So why would that finished product not be tariffed when all the subcomponents, some of which you use in your product, are tariffed? Can you explain?
So there's a really simple reason for that. So for one thing, because no one has specifically taken notice of, so let's just be specific here. I'm referring to LED lighting. So if you bring in a full LED luminaire from overseas, you don't experience a tariff on it if you resell it here in the US. I manufacture LED luminaires. They're very high end, very specific, and I have a tremendous amount of cost associated with the tools that I bought to manufacture the circuit boards and the LEDs themselves, the LED boards themselves here in the USA, and a lot of trained employees to put this all together. But I am tariffed on all the components that I bring in from China to build that luminaire, even though there's nowhere else to get them.
So have you asked anybody for a reason why you're, not really your competitors, because they're probably selling for different markets, but why that product would not be tariffed when the subcomponents, clearly, if you were building that product, would be tariffed? So
my guess is it's because there's a perception that China is the one paying for the tariffs that needs to be maintained, that is blatantly not true, and that if they tariff that particular LED luminaire, well, guess where there's also LED luminaires? Home Depot, Lowe's, maybe even Best Buy. And when a consumer walks in and sees that their big box store product has gone up in price because of these tariffs, they're not going to like that. So it just happens to be one area that overlaps with what I specifically do that creates an unfair playing field for us as an enterprise and artificially props up Chinese imports.
So you just said something, Home Depot, Target, Walmart. So could it be that Home Depot, Target, Walmart have petitioned the government to make sure that they don't have tariffs on those products?
I'm certain it does, and I'm certain that it's also easy to accept because everyone wants people to vote for them, and if you're hitting consumers directly in the pockets, then they're going to know about it, whereas if you hit entrepreneurs like us, we don't really talk.
Right, and I do remember talking to the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House about how they chose the tariffs. And one of the things that they try to do is, in the case where they didn't have a substitute, then they wouldn't tariff that product. But if in the case that they did have a substitute, they could go to Europe, or maybe it was domestically manufactured, they would put a tariff on it. I think one of the things that you realize that we're not going to rebalance this unless you begin to look at this holistically and not just in terms of individual products, whether or not they have an ability to replace that from another provider.
So that is true, is exclusions. So exclusions do exist, and you're able to apply for exclusions. And typically they only give you, well, the way the exclusions work is that you have a period of time to essentially to get a new supplier. They take the tariff away for a period of time to get a new supplier on the hook. But that's not always possible. Sometimes the only way to do that is to, in our case, invest in manufacturing it on our own. Well, I would love to invest in manufacturing that component on my own. Let's just take injection molding. I would love to invest in injection molding. There's great technology in injection molding these days. And I have a real passion for machining. So, making molds goes hand in hand with injection molding. The only problem is I just lost 25% on top of my bill of material in tariffs. So I just lost even more money that I could use to go ahead and invest in injection molding. The one exclusion for that one product for 1 year, that one component for 1 year, and by the way, they're never going to give you an exclusion for injection molded components because there's plenty of injection molding vendors in the US, but they're not 25% more expensive than Chinese injection molding vendors. They're 5 times more expensive. And the terms that go along with it often is not as favorable: larger order quantities, longer lead time, associated with the fact that it's a more competitive marketplace.
Is that because there's more labor required in the molds, or what is causing that?
The price discrepancy.
Right.
It's the cost of living in the U.S., which is a fair and reasonable one. But I attribute a lot of it to, so I know if I bring the injection molding in-house that I can make the components in-house for the same price I'm buying from overseas. So in other words, the raw component aspect of it just isn't there. It's the margin. It's the margins that companies in the U.S. need to make to survive, and I respect that.
But that's what the tariffs are designed to, because let's be honest, the Chinese Communist Party is not, selling injection molded products to the United States because they're benevolent. They're creating jobs for the Chinese people.
Yeah.
And this is how mercantilism works. You create this uneven balance in terms of this ability to have fair and reciprocal trade, and that's what they've done. They've basically taken advantage of us, our nation, our people, to transfer jobs from America to China in order to maintain legitimacy, so they can continue to control the country. This is something that we should have stepped in and fixed a long time ago. In addition to tariffs, some of them haven't worked out for you. Some of them maybe have. It's probably a mixed bag, but we could do a lot better. And probably you need an across-the-board tariff, just like it used to have prior to them coming in or losing that most favored nation trading status. But other than tariffs, supposing those kind of discrepancies went away because the United States was much more focused on, rather than just making consumers feel good at Walmart, we're going to make sure that we have an ability to be competitive. And actually, because we have a consumption market, we can build our own things.